Good evening, Love Bay family, and welcome back to the Mental Health Hour on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. I'm your host, Felicia Fishoff, registered psychotherapist and founder of Rooted in Resilient Psychotherapy and Wellness. Tonight's conversation is one that many of us have felt, but don't always have the language for. We're talking about bring your whole self, but not that self. The workplace lie. Because let's be honest, many of us have been told to be authentic at work while also knowing that there are parts of ourselves that don't feel safe to bring into the room. So tonight we're unpacking that tension between authenticity, professionalism, safety, and survival. And of course, tonight I am joined by our incredible Real Talk panel, a group of powerful women that I honestly love and adore, who tonight and as always are bringing depth, lived experience, and professional insight to this conversation. Charlene Lex is a registered psychotherapist, Christian life coach, and faith and mental health expert who supports individuals, couples, and organizations in emotional health, spiritual clarity, and purpose driven living. She is EMDR certified and integrates approaches like IFS, EFT, and attachment based therapy, bridging psychological insight with faith based principles. Natasha Pennycook is a multi award winning registered psychotherapist, trauma informed leadership strategist, and international speaker, and the founder and clinical director of her psychotherapy and consulting practice, Natasha Pennycook Psychotherapy. Come on. With over 15 years of experience and she supports high performing professionals and organizations navigating burnout, trauma, and complex workplace dynamics. Roxanne Francis is also a multi award winning psychotherapist, registered social worker, leadership coach, and international speaker, and the founder and CEO of Francis Psychotherapy and Consulting Services. With over 15 years of experience, she works with individuals and organizations on mental health, racial trauma, burnout, and workplace wellness. She is also an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto and was recognized as one of Canada's 100 Black women to watch. Ain't that the truth? And then last but not least is Shanique Victoria Edwards. She is a psychotherapist, mental health consultant, and nationally recognized equity speaker with a background in neuroscience, psychology, and clinical counseling. She holds leadership roles across organizations, including the Canadian Black Nurses Alliance and Black Mental Health Canada, and she is also the founder of the Eden Legacy Foundation. Her work focuses on racial trauma, psychological safety, and culturally grounded approaches to healing. But before we continue, just a quick reminder that while we are mental health professionals, this show is for educational and community conversational purposes only. It is not a substitute for therapy, diagnosis, or crisis support. If something comes up for you during tonight's conversation, we encourage you to reach out to a licensed professional or local support services in your area. And as we move into tonight's conversation, we want to invite you into this space with us. The chat is open. So tonight I'm going to start off with two questions. What helps you feel safe enough to show up as yourself in spaces that you're a part of? And what parts of yourself have you learned to hold back? So drop it in the chat. The chat is open. You don't have to hold this alone. So share your thoughts in the comments, send us a message, or call in because your voice is part of this conversation too. So let's get into it. Ladies, welcome, welcome. Hey! Oh my gosh. Honestly, I love being in the room with you ladies. It just fills my heart. I was looking forward to this all day. I know I say this every week, but I really do look forward to it. And you guys are looking cute and lovely as per usual. So welcome back. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah.
Medea.
really
I
nice
was there, right?
Yeah. Well, ladies, you know that this conversation, I know that when we were brainstorming topics and this came up, it was just like, all right, we gotta address this, especially in light of International Women's Month,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
So,
Yes.
when we're talking about bring your whole self, but not that self, the workplace lie, why does our communities need to be talking about this tonight?
Well, I'm happy to jump right in.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man.
Um,
Yeah, man.
I think it's important for us to talk about it because, especially in today's landscape, so much is demanded of us in the workplace. And
Yes.
when we cannot bring our entire selves into the workplace and we have to compartmentalize and mask and code switch, it's so laborious, to do just simple things. And that
Yeah.
labor really does add to, already, significant stress load that I think that, Black individuals have to bring into the workplace. That Black individuals have to navigate within the workplace, I should say, sorry. And that stress really has an
Mhm.
impact on your overall mental health, and it bleeds out into all the other areas of our lives. And so
Yeah.
I think, putting a spotlight on this and the reality of how much we have to contort ourselves sometimes in certain spaces,
Mm,
really kind of highlighting and signifying, just how much of an impact that has, I think is really important.
absolutely. Top the things.
I think the idea of is it safe, right? I
Yes.
think so much of us enter into different situations, and that's the actual thing that comes up. Is this safe for me to show up like me in this situation,
Yes.
right? In the room that you enter into, is it safe for me to show up as myself, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you're also scanning, right? You're scanning to see who's there, right? Do I have allies in the
Mm,
room? Do I have allies in this space? Do I have people who get me, right?
mm,
Are there people there who it's like
yes.
myself with? And so
Mm-hmm.
all of those things, we're all walking through the world really looking for that sense of belonging. It's kind of like the Brené Brown
Mm-hmm.
research that she's done, right? We're all looking for that sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
But it hits
Yes.
differently as people of color, right? Because it's like
Yeah.
safety, that key word of safety definitely matters
Mm,
for us.
yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I think that, the belonging piece is really big. And as
Mm,
racialized and Black folks, we have learned from a very young age that there's a lot of spaces that we can enter, but we don't see ourselves represented. And when we don't see ourselves represented, there's this natural feeling like I don't belong.
mm,
So when we are in those spaces, whether workplaces or otherwise, a lot of times we are scanning for the safety. But what does safety look like? What does it feel like?
mm,
Fully enter and be in a space. I know different organizations that I've worked with
mhm.
talking about belonging, safety in the workplace, and then
Yeah.
people being very honest. Well, going through these exercises, feeling even though we're talking about belonging, I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel like
Mm,
it really be fully myself here in these organizational
yes.
spaces. So, we're having this conversation, but the real feelings that people are going through is that they have to mask, that they go into the workplace of who they are. And it only allows for a certain subset of who they are. So, we have to be having these conversations more. So we're bringing that into the light more. We're having these conversations saying, hey, we recognize this is an issue. We're not just going to sugarcoat it anymore. We're going to normalize it. And we're actually going to make spaces for us to belong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
I think this conversation is very much needed, particularly as it relates to the workplace. I have
Mm,
some different thoughts, and we'll get into some of that. But I want to start off with a story. Um,
yes.
I'm an immigrant. I'm a Jamaican woman. I've been living in this country now for close to 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But in my first few years of being in this country, I had to be working, right? To keep a roof
Mm-hmm.
over my head. And it took me 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
different jobs and different interview situations. to be interviewed by a racialized woman, a racialized person, right? And I remember sending in my application, sending in my resume, getting a phone call saying that you're selected for an interview, picking my
Yes.
outfit very carefully, and walking into the office expecting to see someone white because that was my experience. And when I walked in and I saw someone who was melanated, I was surprised and somewhat relieved. And then when I sat down and she opened her mouth and a thick Caribbean accent came out, I almost melted with relief. Right? It just, I was floored.
Yeah.
I was pleasantly surprised. I felt so proud. And I even thought to myself, even if I don't get this job, just this experience alone is worth it down here.
Yes.
And I eventually got the job and we developed a lovely relationship. But that stood out to me because that should not be the rarity. That should not be the outlier. You know what I mean? And that's the whole idea that I had expected. I had almost buttoned up my personality waiting for to be interviewed by a white man. Right? And then when she opened the door and I realized that that was not the case, I was not prepared for the wave of relief that swept over me. Right? And so it allowed me to bring my whole self into the room.
Yes.
And it made me realize, this is how the rest of us feel when we're going to work and we're trying to attain, right? We're trying to succeed. This is the weight that we carry.
Absolutely. I mean, I loved everything that you guys said, you know, from needing safety to, you know, feeling like we need to button up our personalities because we are expecting not to see that level of representation, you know, in the different spaces where we're trying to basically leave our mark, because, you know, we always leave our mark, just saying. But right? And you know, Roxanne, even as you talk about you felt like you needed to button up that your personality, can you explain a little bit more of that, what that meant for you, that you needed to button yourself up?
You know, when I was growing up in the Caribbean islands, there was this idea that if you wanted to do well in society, you have to learn to speak the Queen's English. You have to speak properly, right? And lingo and patois and you know, all of the other colloquialisms, that was for your friends, right? But when you're going into an office, when you're trying to attain, this is how you present yourself. And there's enough colonialism to be discussed there. But when I came to this country, I felt that even more, right? Because people who look like me in leadership was very rare, right? And all of the other interviews that I had gone on, I was interviewed by someone who did not look like me. And I know that I was aware of the expectations and the stereotypes that were placed upon not only Black people, but Black immigrants, and then Black immigrants with an accent, right?
Yes.
You know, I feel like I've spent the last few years reclaiming my identity, because my first years in this country, I tried to hide my accent at every single cost. Because I felt that people heard it and assumed she has no experience, she's not as intelligent, she won't know what to do, she's not as capable. And so I did everything in my power to convince of otherwise, to convince that I had post-secondary education, that I was capable, that I knew what I was doing, that you could trust me. And that meant I couldn't allow my accent to slip. That meant I had to assimilate, right? And so I learned, especially in interview situations where you get this one shot, right? Like my rent was riding on this.
Yes.
I had to like straighten up, right? And play the part. And
Yes.
so, I know that people who had lived here decades before had gone through worse, right? They would apply for an apartment and show up and they were told that it was gone, right? And they would show up for
Mm,
a job interview only to hear that they just hired someone else. And so I felt that pressure of falling in line, right? And that meant for me, I could have been wrong, but for me, that meant present as less Black, right? And I'm thank goodness for evolving and learning and unlearning.
yeah.
I've grown
Yes.
into all of the fullness of who I am, right? But back then, as a young adult, with feeling like everything else was on the line, I felt like I had to play a part. And so I felt like I had to button up a part of me and just show up in the kind of excellence that they expected.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you're sharing your story because I feel like all of us, to some extent, has experienced a version of this narrative where we feel like we have to present a part of ourselves that, you know, in order for it to be accepted, we have to present in a particular way. Right. Like I remember being in an interview where someone's like, "Oh yeah, Felicia, you're Black, but you don't act Black." And I remember just leaving the interview and be like, "What the heck does that even mean?"
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's just like, what? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't know. Right?
I feel like when you say that, Felicia, what comes to my mind is that people hear or people have an idea of what they think Black people should behave like, right? And they're usually the negative stereotypes. And when they see someone who behaves outside of that stereotype, instead of letting go of the stereotype, what they hold on to is, oh, you're an outlier. You don't act like you are different from the rest of them. So you don't act Black. Instead of letting go of what they assume Blackness is about, instead of understanding the richness and the variety and the diversity of what exists as Black culture and Black community, instead of opening their minds, they go, oh, Black people act like this, and you are Black and you act like that. You must be different. You don't act like them, right? And that in itself is harmful.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We have a comment in the chat. Tessany. Hey, Tessany, what's up, girl? All right. So Tessany says, this might be an unpopular opinion. I found strength in my ability to code switch, and somehow I felt like I was protecting myself in these very harmful spaces and saving the real me for my family, friends, and close associates. Who wants to take this one? Balls, there you go. Great comment.
Yeah. No, really great comment. And that's the piece, right? Feeling that you have to protect yourself from those harmful spaces in the first place. Why are those spaces harmful? Like,
Right.
to piggyback off what you were saying, Roxanne, the narrative of Blackness is based on the stereotypes and not the popular. I mean, we have some of the popular ones, like you're Black, you can play basketball and all those kind of things. But mostly it's the negative stereotypes, the ones that are projected on TV, in movies. A lot of times Black roles, they're casted for the villain, for the person that's the bad person in movies and in shows. And that becomes a narrative of what Blackness is to a large subset of the population, right? And then it goes into then when they do see someone who is educated and well-spoken and in a leadership role, that person does become the outlier as opposed to what is attainable for every Black person. And that's what's harmful, right? So with even the comment, it is those spaces become harmful and you protect a part of yourself for family, friends, and associate, because we're put in a position that we have to do that. Growing up, I grew up in a very white area of Montreal. And my mom used to always tell me three things, that I have three strikes against me automatically: that I am Black, that I'm a woman, and that I'm English speaking, right? Because growing up in Montreal. So these are the three strikes. And that stuck with me. Everywhere I went growing up, I was the only Black person, only Black girl, only one who looked like me, only one who's bringing lunch like me. So that stuck with me, where every space that I go, I have to work 3 times harder because I already have these 3 strikes against me. So if you think you're walking around with that, and that's why I talk about racial trauma so much, because I lived it, right? Every day, day in and day out, from a really young child, being the only. And that does something to you, right? Psychologically. So it's in figuring out, okay, if these spaces are harmful that I have to protect myself from, then where am I safe to just be? And that's the big question here when we're thinking about workspaces, or when you're climbing the corporate ladder, or you're going to do extracurricular activities. Can I actually show up and be all of me, even though I've been, it's been ingrained that I have these 3 strikes? So we really have to be looking how all of that, and there's so many facets here that we can talk about, from the representation to the harmful images on TV, all of those things. But it's really about how, as quote unquote, these outliers, how can we become now the norm? Because the reality is that the smart, the educated Black individual, that's actually the norm. What we're seeing on TV and represented, that's the outlier. But that is the outlier. But because it has so much airplay, who owns the media? Who's putting those images out there? We have to be asking those actual questions, as opposed to, there's something wrong with me because I'm so different, right? We are the norm.
Girl, I tell you, it's nothing. You just drop everything one time. How are you, sir? Wow.
And to piggyback on what Natasha was just saying, like all of that, right? Like even when I look back to see like where I grew up, like in a small village in Antigua, to be completely honest, like excellence was expected. It was ingrained in us from a young age, right?
Very much
like
so.
To the point that it's like our test scores were like literally posted outside of like classrooms, so that the whole village can go around and see who came first, who came second, who came third. You know what I mean? And all of there's so many stories around this idea of you do well, you do everything with excellence, you do sports with excellence, you do academics with excellence. And so coming here to this country, that was what was still so like instinctive. I internalized a lot of those ideas and ideals, right? And all of those values. So by the time I got here, I didn't understand that some kids they weren't like drilled like that. They didn't have those kinds of expectations, right? And even the idea that they say in most like Caribbean households of, right, you have to work 110%. Right? 110%. You know it. As a Black kid, you know it. Okay, I have to give, no matter what situation I show up in, I have to give 110% of myself to then be accepted as good as someone else, right? And so even as we're looking at things like the media and what they're showing of Black people, that's not my experience, right? It's a caricature of Blackness, right? One that I don't see myself in, I don't identify with, and yet someone is benefiting from putting that out there.
Yep.
Right? And it's not me, and it's not people who look like me.
I would also add to, just based on that comment, that, and I like the way that it was worded, because it became a protective factor, right? When we go into these spaces that are not safe for us, they don't deserve us, right? And so this idea of I'm keeping myself
Yes.
for the people who do deserve me, who deserve to see the fullness of who I am and not have to see this fragmented or, a version of me that is, tired or stressed out or broken down. And so that really does become a bit of a safeguard. And I think that is something to keep in mind too, is that when we're in certain spaces and folks are applying certain stereotypes to us, is it possible that we're forced to put up this boundary because the environment that we're in is perpetually unsafe? And while there may be, really great, advances in terms of, having certain rules and regulations around, anti-Black racism and diversity training and all of that stuff, right? Oftentimes those things are just surface level, right? They're not going to the heart or the meat of the situation or the issue to create an atmosphere where I don't have to come in here out with all of these boundaries and these fences around me just to protect myself so I can go back to my partner, my children, my family, and they get to see the proper representation of me.
I saw something on a social media app recently around someone said something about, is it really code switching or is it being adaptable, right? Adaptable from one environment to the next. And initially I was like, you know what, they're right. But then I walked away and I thought about that for a minute. And I thought to myself, no, they're not right. Adaptability is what happens when you morph from one room to the next, right? Adaptability is when you are at work and you can, you speak more sort of corporate language, and then you speak more colloquially with your friends, right? That's adaptability. Adaptability is when you hang out with your kids at home and you call them all these cute little names and you don't use that kind of language at work. That's adaptability. Code switching, however, is a protective mechanism. There is a purpose for code switching, right? And it is a protective lens. It is a lens of, as Shanique said, preserving yourself for your family. And as Natasha was saying, what's the need for that protection? What's the need for that preservation, right? And I heard another speaker say that people who don't have to code switch are the ones with privilege in the room.
Yep.
Right? Switching is something that happens for people who don't carry the privilege in the space. And this is something that we really need to pay attention to. Our society is multi-layered. Our society is, to Charlene's point, there are certain people who benefit from a certain portrayal of who we are. And when you are in the workplace and you can just show up and roll in, and you don't have to think about the words that you use, you don't have to think about doing the mental translation. How do we say this here, as opposed to when I'm with the guys after work or with my girls? That is something that comes with privilege, and it's exhausting. I'll tell you another very brief story. And I share this all the time. I have a friend that we used to work together at my last job, and she's an amazing, amazing woman. And she's Italian, and she's just lovely. Overall, amazing woman. I began to realize very quickly that she's an ally. And I remember going out in the community and having a conversation with her. We were just, shooting. And I was about to say something to her, but I was going to use like a Black reference. And I paused in conversation, about to do the mental gymnastics to spit it out in a different way. She gently put her hand, reached out and put her hand on mine and said, Roxanne, you don't have to censor yourself when you're with me. And I just felt so seen. Right? It's like she crossed and ripped the mask off and said, you don't have to wear that here. Right? And I've never, it's been multiple years and I have not forgotten that, because it was so profound for me. And now when I talk to her, I just talk. Because you don't get all this. Right? She's now part of the fold.
Yes.
Right? Because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
You are listening to the Mental Health Hour on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. It helps us continue these important conversations and reach more people in our community. Download the Love Bay app on the Apple App Store or Google Play and stream us anytime. Visit lovebayradio.live to listen, support, and donate. Your contributions help us continue serving you. And don't forget, you can call in and be part of the conversation at 437-778-3299. We are here serving you 24/7. Yes, guys, you guys are just talking all the things, right? I love that you talked about the exhaustion that comes with code switching, right? Because I mean, I think that it's so beautiful that you have that amazing friend that was able to see you, because I think everybody wants to be seen, right? And it, when we enter into these spaces and we feel like we're not seen, in fact we feel like there's competition always. I mean, I'll just call it out. It feels like competition a lot of times, right? Especially the more that we thrive, we walk in our excellence. There's this like pressure that is like, well, who do you think that you are? Where do you think you're going? And it's almost like people try to push you down because they're afraid of what will happen when we rise in our power. So, yeah, like how do we deal with that emotional labor that, or that weathering over time?
I have a little bit of a story. It's actually a recent story that's happened to me. I spent many decades, or not many decades,
Yes.
a whole decade working at a hospital, and for the most part, my experience there was fluid, I would say, right? Nothing was too glaringly difficult, but we knew there were those underlying currents that were there, right? And I was able to do my work. I loved my work. I was able to elevate through the organization and go on and essentially reach the peak of where I was going to be in the organization based on my role. And around the last part of my transition, as I moved up in the organization, I got a new manager. And early on, the manager came on really strong, very, very, very strong. And in my efforts to really collaborate and to allow myself to still speak up for myself, but at the same time, not wanting to be the troublemaker, I decided, what, I'm going to kind of just approach with this, conversation around micromanagement, because that's what I was experiencing. They had been in the role, the manager had been in the role for about 2 weeks, and the micromanagement was strong, very, very strong. And it wasn't on anybody else who was kind of also one of her direct support, right? Nobody. I did my due diligence, right? Ask the questions. Is it just me? Is anybody else experiencing this? And realizing that it was just me. And I just wrote up an email. Can we have an opportunity to talk about this? I don't thrive under micromanagement. I want to be able to meet you where you're at. And as a new manager, I'm sure you're coming in with your own ways of doing this work, la, 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 la. And the email that I got back was, this was 2 weeks of her in this new role. The email that I got back was, Shanique, I have experienced you being very defiant and defensive in your work. And at that moment, right, I just had to swallow that. And I actually went to her, a couple weeks later, and I said, it's really harmful for you to put words like that in writing.
In writing.
Yes.
To a Black employee. Extremely harmful. It's been 2 weeks of us working together. At which point have I been defensive? Have I been defiant to anything that you were saying? And that unleashed this cascade of racial trauma that I experienced. And even though I have spoken on this topic so much, it wasn't until I was going through it having the panic attacks, couldn't go into meetings where
Yes.
this manager was, couldn't
Yes.
even drive into work sometimes, like had to pull off the side of the road because the level of anxiety, and just to be transparent and honest, I think this is a safe space, and just to keep it real, even having to go on medication for anxiety, I had never dealt with
Yeah.
anything like that ever before.
Mm.
And so when we talk about the level of stress and the weight that it takes,
Yeah.
the weight that it places on us, coming out of that, I
Yeah.
have to say that my nervous system, I think, is still trying to recover. Like the shot to my nervous system, because I still have to show up and go to work, right? My bills are on the line, just as Roxanne was saying, my rent got to get paid, and at the same, and I was also in a job that I actually loved. And, as I sit here and I reflect, the harm wasn't just based on the person who was perpetuating it. The harm was also amongst the people around who acted like they were allies, but they weren't. Because when it came time to step up and say something or course correct, kind of took the place of, well, because you have the privilege, right? You don't have to. You don't want to murky the waters. And
Right.
so, I think as we have this,
Yes.
it is really important, for those who are racialized and those who are not, right? The weight is on both sides, right? And the impact is extremely real.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Mm.
allowing me space to share that.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
I'm so sorry you
100%.
experienced
So-
that. That's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
As you were talking about that, Shanique, and I was listening to what Felicia was saying there. I'm not sure if you're familiar. There's this concept called tall poppy syndrome, where women who excel, right? As you were talking about, who do you think you are to excel to this to the level that's higher than others? And I think about Shanique's story, right? Working in the hospital, doing well, showing up in excellence as a Black woman, there is this idea of we must cut you down.
Yes.
Right? You are taller than everybody else. And I think about
Yes.
that manager. I mean, I wonder if she felt like you were going to upstage her.
Yeah.
Right? There is this idea of you can't get ascend to those heights. We got to cut you down.
Yeah.
And it's really, really tragic, particularly in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's tragic and it's harmful,
Absolutely.
right? Because here you are speaking as a professional, going through this and very professionally writing that email. And you speak of after 2 weeks, that's 10 days, right? That is 10 days. The person has just started still getting to know people's names.
Yes.
And here they're saying these very harmful things that are, let's just call a spade as based on all of these stereotypes. Because they didn't know who, what, where, when, why
100%.
about you. And then saying these really harmful things. So we really have to put that out there where, you working in that space, trying to manage, going in and going through essentially all of the symptoms of racial trauma and having to still navigate that. While at the
100%.
same time, you may have gotten along very well with your coworkers prior, thinking that they were allies. But when the time came for you to be supported, to be held up, there was no one who was there who was willing to be an accomplice.
Yeah.
And there is a difference between the ally and accomplice. An accomplice, right?
Yes.
An accomplice. So let's just call it out, because accomplice is that, okay, I may get in trouble here, but I'm there with you. I'm going to call it out. No one was willing to call it out after you had worked there for, you had said you were there for a decade.
Yeah.
So like, these are the real things that our clients are going through, that people are going through, that our community is going through. But now when you have other mental health professionals who are also going through it, this is a bigger, wider systemic issue that needs to stop.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad that you brought up, the systems, because not only do we have to go through this interpersonally, but then on top of that, there's the policies and all of these things that don't protect us either.
Exactly.
And I think like with Shanique's story, what was hard. It's hard to hear it before, it's hard to hear it now again. Is
Mhm.
how they actually weaponized the email,
Mhm.
like how she actually
Mhm.
the writing,
Yeah.
right? And it's like this idea, even the words chosen,
Mhm.
not the caricature of the angry Black woman,
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not even original. Like it's the same old tropes that they're using,
Yeah.
right? And this is what Black women have to deal with,
Yeah.
right? And so it's so destructive. And after all of these years, no matter how excellent we show up in our jobs, in our lives, in our communities, one person can come in and within 10 days
Yeah.
cause this much damage.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And the fight, I will say, the fight that ensued, as a result, and that is still ensuing even right now. And a part of it is because I do feel like I can't just lay aside and not do something, right? I have to do
Yeah.
something. I have to do something about it. And even if at the end of the day the institution wins out, at least I can rest and know that I did my part. But I have to say too, as we talk about this whole idea of not being able to bring your whole self into the workplace, and the lack of safety that's there, especially when you try to vocalize things, right? And how
Yeah.
that just strips away at who you are. And
Yeah.
Felicia, you brought up a point around like how do
Yeah.
you navigate this? And I think community is so important. The fact that we're actually having
100.
this conversation, being honest and real about our experiences, I think is
Yeah.
really important because it touches everybody. It doesn't matter, kind of if you're here, if you're down there, if you're in the field, if you're not in the field, we can all
Yeah.
resonate with these stories and really kind of, highlight the fact that it's hard. It's hard to still be going through this. I've left that organization now, but it trails on with me because I'm trying to fight this good fight. And so it's so important that you have your community with you, those
Yes.
people who can pour into you, because even if you are the strongest person, going through something like that made me realize that it still stings. And death by 1,000 paper
Yeah,
cuts
well.
is a real thing. You begin to lose yourself. You begin to wonder, is a little bit of what was being said, is that
Some of
true? And
Yes.
you go into these meetings and you're talking, and I would come out of like an HR meeting and I'm just crying and shaking. And it's just because I'm just so frustrated being in a space like that, especially within an organization that has equity driven, guidelines and strategic plans and all of these things, and not even looking at the fact that, the very people that you're trying to say that you're supporting through these strategic plans, it's the very person who's getting hurt, the very people who are getting hurt here, right? And so, I come back to the idea of community, having these types of conversations, allowing, having spaces where you can feel safe and bringing your whole self to those places.
Mhm. Mhm. I don't think people are really aware of how mentally damaging racism is. They just don't get it.
Agreed.
Mhm.
100%.
They just don't get it. Like having to go to
No.
work and having to deal with this and having to go into that situation every day,
Mhm.
that is traumatic,
Mhm.
right? Shanique, I'm
Yes.
so glad that you're here and that, Felicia has created this space and just being able to speak, to talk it through. I mean, obviously you've done some work. Having this conversation, I'm so grateful for. Thank you for sharing so candidly, right? But it is mentally draining. And the interesting thing, I got upset, Shanique, when you said, an organization like that has all of these policies and these mandates, and I often work with organizations around how to live out the policy. What does it look like, boots on the ground? Because it is nice to have a fancy policy and say, oh, we did that checkbox. But how does it look day to day, communicating with your employees, going through yearly reviews? What does that look like?
Yes.
What does it mean when it says you're not a player? Like what do these things actually look like? Oftentimes when people, so I'm getting hot under the collar.
It's okay. Girl, talk the things.
When people talk about racism, right? People are so easy to say, so happy and quick to say, I'm not racist, because They
Yes.
think that racism is like a, how do I put this? They think of it almost like a criminal act. You either do it or you don't do it. I
Yes.
pick up
Mhm.
a pencil and I put it here. That's the act, right? People are still looking for things like signs that say coloreds only. People are
Mhm.
still looking for things like, I'm not hiring you because you don't look like me. This is not the kind of racism that occurs in our workplaces, right?
Mhm.
People use policies against us. They smile in our faces
Correct.
and send us emails that tell us that we are, what she say?
Yep.
What she say?
Defiant and defensive.
Defiant and defensive, right?
Yep.
And take
Yep.
us into HR and have these meetings and throw these things at us that are emotionally damaging,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
This has happened years ago, and Shanika's still living with this. We are still
Yeah.
living with this, right?
Yeah.
And so it is really
Yes.
imperative
Yes.
that when
Yeah.
people are writing policy, who is at the table writing the policy,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
What do the policy writers look like? Who have you
Yes.
consulted with? What does this look like when we have to live it out? Sorry.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. No, don't be sorry, because it has to be
Don't be
said. And
sorry.
this is the reality. A lot of times these policies, procedures are being written by the higher ups that don't look like any of us, but then they're
Yep.
impacting all
Mhm.
those who look like us. And that is a huge systemic issue. But it all, it's also that piece where people are like, enslavement was 400 years ago, get over it. But look at all of the policies, how they're still upholding the legacies of slavery.
Mhm.
And this is the issue, right? Where you
Yes.
have people who are going through exactly what Shaniqua you went through. And you're dealing with this, you're continuing to deal with this. It continues to be an everyday part of your lived experience, and you're able to
Yep.
talk it out. You have the training. Look at all those other people. So we really have to get better at
Yes.
looking, okay, cool. You have the policy. That's nice. Check the box. But how are you living it out? How are your racialized employees how do they actually feel about being in the workplace? How are they spoken to? Are they spoken at? Are they spoken down to? Or are they a part of the conversation? We need to be more a part of the conversation. And honestly, the leadership of organizations have to look like the frontline people and the people who are being served. That is one of the biggest issue.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that needs to be clear from the get-go.
We have Miss J in the chat. Miss J is saying, say it with your chest. Facts. And here. Yes, Miss J. 100%. But the thing is that, again, the people that are holding the power don't want to give it up.
Mm-mm.
And that's the key around doing, when we talk about, yes, we're talking about the fact, having to not being able to show up as our whole self, right? But I think one of the things too is that we are very much so, active of wanting to be a part of that solution too, right? I think that if you're talking about power, is that there's a call for us to collaborate, a call for us to partner. Sometimes we are at the table, right? But the decisions have already been made about how forward, right? The writing has already been, sealed and printed and all of that. And really it's just to say we did the thing. Not because you actually are looking to co-create and co-develop and evenly distribute the power so that all voices are being heard and accounted for, right? And also, we're not doing that next level of identifying what are our gaps. Because even though we may consult with, a few Black folks, they don't speak for all Black folks, right? We're not a monolith. There are different experiences. If you immigrated here, if you were born here, right? Based on where you're from. Are you from the continent of Africa? Are you from the Caribbean? Are you from somewhere else, South America? Right? There's so much there, but we put out these blankets. And I think that when we talk about, how can we perhaps that first step of trying to make a place safe for us to begin to feel like we can come in as we are, is let's stop with the blankets. Let's recognize the fact that we have some real fractures in our foundations, right? And a part of that is system and structural. We may not be able to change it all, but we're recognizing it, right? And as we're doing this, we're realizing that we're not going to be able to see everything. So rather than coming to us and saying, well, what do you need from us? And doing a bunch of check boxes, it's really about asking us, what are we missing here?
Mhm.
Right? Allow us to bring forth some of the answers. And then that I think will really help to, remove this kind of, blanket or cloak that a lot of, organizations and places put over their spaces that are not safe for us to show up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But I think the
But that-
problem though is that sometimes they might not even be asking, what are we missing here? Because as long as they're comfortable, everything's fine,
Yes, it is.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That's
I
what I
remember
wanted to.
when
100%.
Mr. Floyd was murdered in the United States, and there was a lot of social uprising, and a lot of lights were turning on, quite frankly, in people's lives.
Yes.
I heard a lot of leaders who don't look like us say, I had no idea,
Yes.
right? And I'm just like, that ignorance is a privilege.
Mhm.
Because if it does not impact you, then you have no need to foster any change. You have no need to ask any questions. You have no need to ask people how uncomfortable they are. You don't have to listen to the conversation about them being uncomfortable because you're like, well, I didn't experience that.
Mhm.
Right? And so people have to be willing to hear the hard things.
Yes.
People have to be willing to sit down and be quiet and let other people talk about how the policies, how things unfolding, how it's impacting them, right? And put your comfort aside and be willing to make changes based on what other people's lived experiences in the workplaces are, so that they can feel more emboldened to bring more of their real selves to work.
100%.
Absolutely. Here's the thing though, Roxanne, if they actually hold space for it, they have to then do something. They don't want to do nothing,
It-
right? And so that's why they actually shut themselves off, right? They don't want to be awakened to somebody else's pain, right? So they literally close themselves off from the other person's experience, the other person's suffering, so that they don't actually have to be activated to step in and become an ally, right? To become the person who's standing next to that person who is actually in going through the situation, and they can say, this is wrong. They don't want to do that, right? And it's interesting because you brought up like the whole like 2020 George Floyd. That was a knee-jerk reaction from many companies, right? It was almost trendy.
It was.
Yes. It was.
The
With the
bandwagon.
black square and all.
Yeah, right? And so even that pissed me off.
Yep.
It was not about really coming alongside and walking with Black people as much as it was about, well, how can we improve our sales and show that we're actually like, one of the good guys, so that our sales keep improving, because this demographic of Black people purchase things, right?
Yeah.
And
Correct.
so it's so frustrating, whether it's from a systemic perspective or from even like a personal perspective, this idea of people seeing what's going on and literally turning their head, sticking their head in the sand, and leaving you there to then endure it on your own.
On your own.
Right? Because they do not want to then feel the discomfort within them. And because if they feel the discomfort, then they then have to move forward and do something. They do not want to do anything about it.
Charlene, you are so correct that it was trendy. It was on point for a lot of people, because look what has happened just at the end of 2025, beginning of 2025. All those trendy jobs, DEI and what is it, people of culture, and all those. What happened to all those roles? Those same companies who were making sales, they decided, oh, okay, the trend is done. We're done too. And they're no longer, no, it's not, no one's looking at that anymore. So let's get rid of all those jobs. And a lot of those jobs were held by women who are racialized. So when we start thinking about the whole self in the workplace, it looked like, okay, great, here's the opportunity. I could bring myself to the workplace. I have a job title that has parts of me in it. Oh no, now I'm not needed, right? So we're looking at these workplaces, and there's this piece that I talk a lot about, have done different presentations on, the privilege, power, and powerlessness.
Mhm.
Right? So when we look at all of that, the privilege, who has the privilege, who has the power, but who actually is powerless in maybe the decision making, who's maybe a figurehead for those check boxes. Right? We're looking at all these systems and policies and procedures and a privilege. But
Yeah.
Charlene, you said that there's a privilege to be able to say, oh yes, this is trendy. Oh no, now I'm turning away. There's a privilege there for these organizations, but that privilege is not there for the people who are racialized and Black.
Yes.
So for listeners that are tuning in tonight and they're like, yes, yes, and yes, I'm experiencing all of this. This is my lived reality. And maybe they've resonated with the different stories that have been shared tonight about the impact of this on our nervous system, right? And just how, yes, can we say blinders? Hello, absolutely, Miss J, right? Where do they go from here when they're like, okay, I'm experiencing the heart racing, I'm experiencing the anxiety, I'm experiencing all of this because really I don't have a safe space, and because the people obviously who has the power to make the safe space through policy and all of this aren't doing it. So can they do? What can our community do tonight?
Shanique said community. We need community. We need to
Yes.
be having these conversations because, in the workplaces, these conversations are not being had. Someone had said before, right? Like going to the family, the friends, those different audiences where you are seen, where you are heard, that makes space for you. And that could be someone who's racialized like you or someone else, like Roxanne, how you shared about your Italian friend, right? Someone who's able to make space for all of you to show up. And that may not be someone who you actually think it is. So you are going to have to go and do a little bit of searching within your network. Who can you go to where all of you is safe? It could be different people for different parts of you, or it could be a specific community for all parts of you. But we really need to get better at building community. We are a Black community of communities.
Yes.
Right? We're not a monolith. We are a community of communities. We need to be
100%.
able to uphold each other as communities.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The other thing that I would say is, think about your exit strategy. If you're going to work every single day and you are being harmed every single day, like Shanique said, it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? And think about, if you had a child and they were going to school and they were being bullied and beat up every day, and the administration was doing absolutely nothing, you'd grab up your picnic and get into a different school, right? Instead of having them endure that endless. So start looking at your exit strategy. It doesn't mean that you have to get up and quit in a huff, because who's going to buy groceries next week when no paycheck coming in, right? So make a plan, whether that's with a career professional or your therapist or, your partner or whoever, but sit down and make a plan, make a financial plan, look at what other job options are out there, whether or not you need to go back to school, but make a plan so that there's light at the end of the tunnel, and that tunnel isn't like super long, so you can get out and preserve yourself.
Can I just quickly expand on what Roxanne just said, because that's the key there, right? The moment that the harm was happening to me, I knew I needed to, visualize my exit plan so that I can make it through every day. Really.
Yes.
And so, even with that was consulting with employment lawyers. And sometimes, the reality of it is that, quitting is not in your best interest, depending on how long you have been in that organization, right? And I mean, I'm not, speaking out of place to say this, but, I was, speaking to the lawyers. They had already told me, what to anticipate, what to expect. Just wait for the dismissal, because it was going to come. I was, putting too much pressure on them, that the dismissal was going to come. And sure enough, it did. But, to God be the glory here. I'm just going to say that, I was dismissed on the Tuesday and I started my new job on the Wednesday.
Come
right?
on.
And that was
Mm.
because I was, really plan in advance, right? And it just
Yes.
everything fell into place that way. But that was so integral for me. And everybody who was just reminding me that like, Shanique, this is gonna work itself out, right? You just gotta, keep the pace and know that this is all gonna work itself out. And it did. So that would be something I would definitely highlight. And my community comes right back full circle with that because it was my community also who encouraged me, much as Roxanne was saying, to think about what's your next step. Maybe this is a sign that as much as you've kind of elevated here, this is the peak for you. You're meant to
Yeah.
go somewhere else, right? And it turned out to be so.
And I would just say that the idea of death by 1,000 cuts is real,
Yeah.
right? It's every day that you walk in and people are making comments about your hair, right?
Mhm.
It's the way that you speak, and then people are then acting like they don't understand you,
Mhm.
right? It's all of the little things that add up over time. And to understand that just because it's happening in a workplace today, it also is all of the other things that's happened all of the years, all the way through your entire history. All of the other ways, the other experiences that you've had of trauma, right? And so everything that's happening, like when you're feeling in this day and age, it's then pinging on all of those other experiences that you've had before, right? So knowing that and holding space for that allows you to then tend to yourself,
Yeah.
right? You're not like overreacting, you're not being extra. What you're experiencing is actually happening, right? The feelings of anxiety that you may have are real, right? And it's stemming from this racialized trauma that you have been experiencing for a very long time.
Yeah.
It's not just you and your situation, it's so many other Black people, women and men and everybody else, right? Other marginalized people, other racialized people. You need to be real that all of the hurt, all of the pain, all of the anguish, all of the feelings that are coming up, it's real.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody.
Absolutely.
Talk to somebody
Absolutely.
real about it because you can't go through this on your own. And sometimes you take it to family and family reinforces the
Yes.
pain. Sometimes you take it to people at work who look like you and they are trying to hold you up to that same standard when you go to church, right? If you're not finding that community in the people that you currently have around you, it's okay to go outside of that community and find somebody who can be your ally, who can be your friend, who can walk with you through this. So that's my encouragement. Find the people who can actually help you to heal and that you can be real with about the pain.
I love that you slowed that down there. I think what I would add is the power of self-advocacy. And I know that this is something that I share with my clients a lot that are experiencing racial trauma, right? You have to ask yourself, is this the hill that I want to die on?
Oh, yeah.
And both have a cost.
Mhm.
Yes, they do.
Right? And if you're choosing to die on that hill and to advocate for yourself, understand the weight that comes with that. Um, and I love that you mentioned, Shar, that, not everybody will understand when you share, because even that cost of self-advocacy, especially in other generations where to speak up just had such a huge cost, they'll tell you to stay silent,
Mhm.
right? Out of love and out of care, obviously. But I'm finding that especially now, you have to know your policy. You have to be willing to go to bat for yourself. But again, that sometimes not sometimes, it is a very draining process. So take care of yourself if you're choosing to die on that hill, right? Because that also has an impact. But if you choose to not and you choose to sit with it, again, you have to protect your mental health on that other side, because it's not going to stop. And I'm so glad that, Shar, again, I know that we've mentioned the word racial trauma many times, but if we could even just in the next few minutes talk about racial trauma, because I feel like we don't take it seriously. We think that, okay, if it's not sexual abuse and if it's not other forms of trauma, that, oh, it's, there's some microaggression. But I think one of the main themes that has come out of tonight is that the overall impact over time continues to wear us down. And that in itself can be considered trauma. So can we talk about that? Because we got a 10-minute extension. So we have 5.5 minutes. Let's go.
I want to piggyback on what you just said, Felicia, about those microaggressions. One of the ways that I work with clients around racial trauma is decentering whiteness in the languaging, right? Because when you say micro is small, insignificant, not important. So when you say microaggression, where you're going through racial trauma, where it's, any of that stress that's coming up from a racial act, saying micro means that it's small, it's not significant.
Yeah.
That centers whiteness.
Yeah.
We have to get to the place of like, it's a macroaggression. It's big.
Got the things.
It's
Yes,
bold,
child.
right?
Yes.
It's extensive.
Yeah.
It's a microaggression. And, Shanique getting that email, that was a microaggression, because look what it started, the cascade of what it started. So we really have to be looking also at our language. We need to decolonize that language, especially in therapeutic spaces. That was a microaggression. It might have been macro small for the person who wrote the email, but that was huge for you. And a lot of people are going through macroaggressions and calling it micro because you're not decentering the whiteness of the language.
Wow.
So a lot of times when I talk to people about race at work, sometimes people feign a lack of understanding, right? And so I switch things a little bit, and I would say, well, what would happen if a woman, regardless of race, if she goes into work every day and her boss is commenting on her body, making passes at her, inviting her out to dinner, inviting her out to lunch, brushing up against her, making her work late, the only one in the office, you would see that as sexual discrimination. You would see that as ongoing sexual trauma, right? Well, the same thing is happening to Black people in the workplace. And just because it's, it's not one big major act doesn't mean that it's not happening, right? If someone isn't sexually assaulted at work, it doesn't mean that sexual harassment is not happening.
Yes.
Right? And just because someone isn't being told, I don't know, you're not getting the promotion because you're Black, doesn't mean that racial harm is not happening in the workplace. Right? And what happens is that we are looking for the big act, right? And the smaller things, exactly to what Natasha just said, are not small in impact, right? They're small because they're perceived to be small because it's easy to brush under the rug. It's easy for it to live in between the policies and appear like nothing is happening. But the person to which it is happening to is being harmed in a significant way, and it is highly traumatic. And so we must acknowledge it. We must offer that person support, and that person must be embedded in community in order to navigate and make their way through this.
Absolutely.
Correct.
I think I would add to this too that it's important that we don't minimize the way in which folks may be presenting some of the symptoms of racial trauma. At the time when things were going on with me, I was already working this field. I was already, talking and teaching about racial trauma. And I have to say that I didn't have language at times for my experience. There were times where I was just kind of like, and Felicia and Charlene know, because they were, parts of my community that I was calling at times. And I was like, I just can't make it into work today. Like my heart is racing, right? And Charlene would say, like, you're having a panic attack. Like, that's what's happening here, is you're having a panic attack. And, because we, as a community, we're so used to high functioning, right? Where these things can then just seem like, why can't I just get it together? And that was a lot of what was coming up in my mind. Why can't I just
Yes.
get it together, Shanique?
Mm.
Get yourself together. I remember one time I was going into work, just quickly, I'll add this. I was going into work at this place, and I could not make it over. I was coming from Whitby. If anybody lives in Toronto, and to make my way downtown, I couldn't make it over Morningside. For some reason, I had to pull over. I threw up in the car. It was a whole thing. And when I came home and I kind of sat with myself for a moment, I realized I had 4 meetings with this manager back to back, first thing in the morning. And it was like my body had ceased in that moment to say, like, you
no,
can't go there. That
we're
ain't
not
safe
doing
for
it.
you. You cannot be and they were in-person meetings as well. And so it was like, nope, backtrack. I ended up canceling 2 of the 4 meetings. But in that moment, though, I was really hard on myself because I couldn't really understand what I was going through in that moment. So I just say that to say that sometimes the presentation is not going to look like, and we know this in our community already, it doesn't look like that cookie cutter panic attack. It doesn't look like that anxiety. But when you're in community, you have people bring you back and remind you of certain language and certain things. It can then help you, kind of center that experience and decenter that whiteness, because it becomes about you when it comes to racial trauma. And that's the intention of it. There's something wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. Everything's wrong with you. And these experiences then, inadvertently validate that. So that would be one piece that I would just add there, is that as we hear these things, just helping people to situate themselves in the reality that this is what's happening to you. You're not the problem here.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's interesting because it's like when you look at all of the different Black people, Black women particularly, because that's what we're talking about here, who have experienced in some way, shape, or form racial trauma. And then you look and you see all of them, just visualize all of these different women worldwide, okay? Going back into homes, and then they're then feeling stressed, they're feeling anxious, they're feeling overwhelmed, their cortisol levels are up, it's affecting their health, it's impacting how they're interacting with their families. And then you then look and see the spread of it then with the next generation, the spread of it with the community around them. It's an attack.
Yeah.
This is
It's
an attack, right? It's a systemic attack. And this is why we need to just be able to recognize that, and recognize that the way that we fight against the attack is to privilege our healing. That's what we do.
Absolutely.
Because we won't be able to dismantle the system at this point, but we can decide that we're not going to play the game any longer. And that actually privileging our own systems, that we're spreading awareness about how do we disengage from the things that are harming us, right? That we're not going to play the role of the strong Black woman anymore when that role actually harms us and it harms our community. And so that's what I want people to start thinking. How can you actually begin to dismantle and disrupt the system by starting?
Love that.
Love
that.
Wow.
Beautiful.
I had to write them down. Privilege our healing. Yes. Absolutely.
Wow, we're gonna have to do a part 2 of this. I feel like I say that after every episode. We need a part 2. We need a part 2. So as we come to the end of tonight's amazing, juicy, and sweet conversation, I want to leave you with this: that sometimes it's not that you're too much. It's that the space was never built to hold all of who you are. And that's not a personal failure, that's a systems conversation. Thank you to our incredible panel, Charlene, Natasha, Roxanne, and Shanique, for your honesty, your stories. We honor your stories tonight, your insight, and the space you helped create tonight. And thank you to our Love Bay family for listening, engaging, and growing with us. Next week, we're having a powerful and deeply needed panel conversation entitled Behind the Behavior, a compassionate look at addiction beneath the surface. We'll be joined by Dr. Adrienne Sequeira, Josh Dale, and Andrew Roach. And together we'll explore addiction through a lens of compassion, trauma, and understanding, moving beyond judgment and into deeper awareness of what's happening beneath the surface. So until then, Love Bay family, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember your healing matters, your voice matters, and you don't have to do it alone. Good night, Love